Beetlejuice is one of my bread and butter movies. For as long as I can remember, it's been a movie that I have watched countless times, and it just keeps getting better every single time. While there are a few things about this movie that I could call inconsistencies within the narrative, my enjoyment does not decrease as I grow more critically analytical towards stories. Compare this to, say, the 1989 Batman film, also directed by Tim Burton, where every time I watch that movie now, I like it less and less. Fortunately, that's not the case with Beetlejuice. If you have not seen this movie, Beetlejuice is a 1988 somewhat dark comedy about a married couple who, spoiler, die, and then they have to deal with an eccentric family that moves into their house, and they have to find some way to deal with them. As I said, it is directed by Tim Burton, and it stars Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis, Winona Ryder, Michael Keaton, Catherine O'Hara, and Jeffrey Jones. One thing I find interesting about this movie has to do with the public perception of it. 1 year after this movie came out, there was already an animated series based on it, which should give you an idea about how insanely popular this movie was. But the cartoon heavily focuses on Beetlejuice himself, and basically defangs him, transforming him from a psychotic, unpredictable force of mayhem to the hero of his own kids' show. But this movie only actually shows Beetlejuice on screen for about 20 minutes or less. This movie really does belong to Adam and Barbara Maitland, the couple who die at the beginning of the movie, and Lydia, sorta our POV character who comes to live at the house. And let me talk about that real quick. In the past, I've talked about how, in a world that is vastly different from our own, the story will often need one character who is similar to the audience so that we can learn things about this strange and unusual world with that character. And Lydia is sort of that for this movie, except that Adam and Barbara are actually that. Adam and Barbara are possibly the two most normal people in this movie. They die and they don't even know it. We find out along with them all of the rules of the world of the dead. You can't see yourself in a mirror. You can't leave your house. If you commit suicide, you become a civil servant in the afterlife. We find out all of this from their perspective, not Lydia's. Lydia really feels more like a plot device here than an actual character. She almost releases Beetlejuice when she air quotes "once in." She is an object to be rescued by Adam and Barbara at the end of the movie after she does release Beetlejuice. A great character is one who feels real to us. They will have many different character traits, and if the story is done right, then they go through some kind of change throughout the story, and at the end of the movie you can see how they've changed. And sure, Lydia passes some of those tests. She certainly reminds me of about 1/4 of the people I went to high school with, who have it pretty great but complain that nobody understands them. She does change by the end of the movie. She's much less the whiny goth kid in the final scene. But we don't get to see that change. We don't know how much time has passed from the wedding to the final scene. It could be months. However long it is, Lydia's character arc happens off-screen, which is no bueno. Honestly, if there was one thing I could say has changed the most for me when I watched this movie, it's my perception of Lydia. As a child, I always latched on to the character who was close to my age, even if that character was really unlikable. This was true for Wesley Crusher from Star Trek The Next Generation, and it was true for Lydia. But I like to think that I'm smarter now. I look at Lydia and I think she's really not that great, either as a character or as a person. She's kinda whiny, and like I said, she's basically just a plot device. Just because the movie tells us that we should feel sorry for her doesn't mean that we will, and I don't. Weirdly enough, even though we are told that we should not like Charles Dietz, he is one of the more likable characters in this movie outside of the Maitlands. He buys a house that is for sale, and suddenly we're meant to hate this guy because Adam and Barbara consider this their house. But really, how is Charles supposed to know this? They're dead. As far as he's concerned, this is just an ordinary house to help him get away from the stress of his job. This movie also throws us some things that I consider very ironic, and I don't know if this movie itself is aware that these things are happening or not. Considering some of Tim Burton's other directorial efforts that I don't like nearly as much as this movie, I'm inclined to think that these things are not intentional and are just happy accidents. For example, Lydia and Delia more or less can't stand each other, but look how similar these two are. Both are air quotes artists. Delia expresses herself through her sculpting, while Lydia expresses herself through her photography. Sure, we don't get to see much of Lydia's photography, except for, once again, when it's used as a plot device, i.e., when she first sees Adam and Barbara, she's taking pictures, and when she sees them again, she's taking pictures. I want to quickly talk about Adam and Barbara again. Even though I like them much more than Lydia, I also don't think they quite pass the test as protagonists. Their character arc is basically learning to accept the Dietzes, which is just as much of an arc on the part of the Dietzes as it is for Adam and Barbara. It's easy to live with someone when they're not trying to exercise you. But at the end of the movie, I'm not sure you can say they've really made any changes as people. Maybe this is intentional. After all, they are dead, so they don't have any more of this life thing that they have to go through, which would change them as people as they get older. They're basically static characters from the moment they fall in the river at the beginning of the movie. But still, I almost feel like these guys are just as much vessels that carry out the plot as Lydia is. But I think that's too harsh for these two. At the end of the movie, even if they refuse to go through any kind of character arc other than accepting the Dietzes, I still like them as characters more than 4 of the other characters in this movie, so that's saying something. Maybe now is the time I should talk about some of the things that just don't work in this story. This feels very much like a movie where the director and the screenwriters are all sitting in a room and they say something like, "It'd be really cool if Adam and Barbara, mutilate their faces and go scare the Dietzes," even though there's really not much of a progression to that point in the story. This movie is full of stuff like that. Stuff that I get the feeling Tim Burton wanted to see because it would look cool, but there really is no progression to those things. It's a whole bunch of basically unrelated events that all happen to share the same characters. That may seem harsh, especially when you consider that I really do love this movie, but let me explain a few of these things and maybe you'll understand what I mean. When the movie starts, Adam and Barbara are pretty inexperienced as ghosts. They try a few little things to scare the Dietzes away, but this proves ineffective because the Dietzes can't see them. Then after Barbara and Adam have summoned Beetlejuice and they decide they don't want to use his services, Adam says he has an idea. Then we see the Dietzes and their guests eating supper, and somehow Adam and Barbara are capable of forcing all of these people to dance and sing the Banana Boat song, and then they are able to force the shrimp to reach up and grab their faces. How? When did these people suddenly become Jedi Masters? And then shortly before the climax of the movie, Juno, their caseworker, wants them to go scare the Dietzes real good this time. So they turn their faces into monstrous forms. But again, how is this going to help at all if the Dietzes cannot see Adam and Barbara? Has something changed in between the beginning of the movie and the end that I did not notice? Or how about this little ditty? While the Dietzes are moving in, Adam and Barbara are frantically looking through the Handbook of the Recently Deceased, and a flyer advertising Beetlejuice falls out of the book. Now, on the flyer, his name is spelled Beetlejuice, and when Adam reads the flyer aloud, he pronounces it that way. And then later, when the commercial comes on the TV, it's still spelled that way, and Beetlejuice doesn't ever say his own name. So after Juno has explained that these guys do not want to mess with this guy, suddenly Barbara says his name correctly. How and where did she learn to do this? Up until this point, nobody has said the name, and anytime we see it written, it is not spelled the way that you are apparently supposed to pronounce it to call him forth. This right here is what I like to call the plot needs to happen in a certain way-itis. And lastly, when Barbara and Adam are talking to Juno, their caseworker, they ask about Beetlejuice. She tells them everything about this guy, including how to summon him. Bear in mind that Juno did not want them to summon this guy, but she tells them how to, and then when they ask her how they're supposed to contact her, she disappears. What a jerkhole. Now, I would say this is another point where the movie has the plot needs to happen in a certain way-itis, but if the movie wanted Adam and Barbara to know exactly how to summon Beetlejuice, they did see the commercial earlier in the movie where it said, "Say it once, say it twice, third time's a charm." So really, what did this weird character inconsistency give the movie other than hammering home exactly how to summon Beetlejuice if you've forgotten in the last 30 minutes? I know it sounds like I have many problems with this movie, but I promise I really do like it. It's pretty much tied as one of my favorite Tim Burton movies ever, so let that be what it's worth. So I hope that my thoughts didn't send too many mixed signals out there. Even with movies I like, if there's problems with the characters or the story itself, then I feel like I have to discuss those even if they don't exactly affect my enjoyment of the movie. And in this case, they don't. I still love this movie. So I hope you guys liked this review and found it helpful. And if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll be back tomorrow with some other kind of video. Until then, have a great day.